The Jovian gas mining platform felt like the universe's worst theme park. The kind where the only rides are the elevators, and the ticket price is your sanity. Captain Rylan Vex stared out at the swirling chaos of Jupiter's atmosphere through the grimy viewport, musing that while nature's storms were magnificent, the same couldn't be said for the human ones he was stuck with. "Vex, you gonna stand there sulking, or are you gonna actually command something?" came the voice of his second-in-command, Lieutenant Barra. Barra had the charm of a rusty nail and twice the warmth. "We've got a sitrep from the Elysium." Rylan rolled his eyes, turning away from the planet's gas curtains that looked like a toddler's first attempt at finger painting. "What is it this time?" "More bad news, I assume. You bet your last remaining brain cell," Barra replied with a smirk that could sigh or milk. "There's a signal." "A signal? What kind of signal? The kind that gives us all a fat bonus or the kind that gets us all killed?" Rylan asked, knowing full well how the universe loved to play cruel jokes. Barra shrugged, the universal gesture for "we're screwed but too tired to do anything about it." "It's coming from Earth, if you can believe that." Earth. The word hung in the air like a bad smell, the birthplace of humanity, now a playground for cultists with more robes than sense, a pilgrimage site for the superstitious and the brainwashed. "Earth," Rylan repeated, tasting the irony like cheap whiskey. "The planet we ran away from now calling us back. Like a bad ex you thought you blocked," Barra added. "Or a particularly persistent rash," Rylan noted, moving to the console. He tapped a few keys and brought up the data from the Elysium. The ship, their tin can of salvation and purgatory, orbited above like a loyal but slightly deranged pet. "What do the cultists want now?" Rylan asked, scanning the readings. The signal was a jumble of static and hidden intent, like a mystery box from hell. "Dunno," Barra said, leaning over Rylan's shoulder with the enthusiasm of a man staring into his own grave. "But the higher-ups want us to check it out," Rylan grunted. "Of course they do. Nothing like a suicide mission to start the day." "Look on the bright side," Barra said with a grin. "If we die, at least we won't have to file the report." "Now there's a silver lining," Rylan replied deadpan. "All right, assemble the team. Let's see who wants to volunteer for this little field trip back to the madhouse." The team, as it turned out, was a collection of the galaxy's finest misfits. Specialist Kiera, who had a knack for explosives and an attitude to match, and Engineer Tobin, whose cynicism was rivaled only by his mechanical genius. "Earth, huh?" Kiera drawled, her voice like sandpaper on a chalkboard. "Always wanted to see what a planet full of fanatics looks like. Like a circus, but with less fun," Tobin chimed in, tapping away at his data pad. "And probably more clowns." "I hate clowns," Rylan muttered, rubbing his temples as if he could massage away the migraine that was his life. "You're in for a treat, then," Tobin said with a grin that could stop traffic. "All right, folks," Rylan announced, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We're heading back to Earth. Let's find out what this signal is and why the hell it's so important. And if we're lucky, we'll live to regret it," Kiera added cheerfully. The trip to Earth was as smooth as a gravel road, the Elysium rattling through space with all the grace of a drunken elephant. Rylan watched the planet grow larger on the screen, a blue-green marble that had once been home but now felt as foreign as an alien world. "Home sweet home," Barra said, clapping Rylan on the back hard enough to dislodge a lung. "You ever been to Earth, Vex?" Kiera asked, not looking up from her weapons check. "Once, when I was young and stupid," Rylan replied. "Now I'm just old and stupid. At least you're consistent," Tobin pointed out. "Ready to drop, Captain," came the voice of their pilot, Jenna, who had the reflexes of a cat and the patience of a saint. "Hope everyone packed their sanity, 'cause we're gonna need it." "Wasn't on the list," Barra said, strapping in beside Rylan. The descent was bumpy, the atmosphere buffeting them like a boxer working a punching bag. Rylan clenched his jaw, focusing on the mission at hand. Find the signal, figure out what it wanted, and get out before the cultists decided they needed new recruits. As they broke through the clouds, the surface of Earth spread out below them, a patchwork of ruins and overgrown landscapes. The cult had made its mark here, turning once thriving cities into temples of madness. "Welcome to the end of the world," Kiera muttered, peering out the window. "I expected more fire and brimstone," Tobin commented as they touched down in what used to be a parking lot, now a field of weeds and debris. Rylan unbuckled his harness, standing with the enthusiasm of a man on his way to the gallows. "Let's find this signal and hope it's not a prelude to something worse." Like a holiday with the in-laws, Barra quipped as they disembarked. The air was thick, a mix of pollution and the ever-present scent of fanaticism. Rylan led the way, his team fanning out behind him, weapons at the ready. "Signals coming from that building," Tobin said, pointing towards a crumbling structure that looked like it was about to give up and take a nap. "Great," Kiera said. "I love creepy old buildings. They always make you feel so welcome." "Let's see what our friends the cultists have left for us," Rylan replied, stepping through the half-collapsed doorway. Inside, the gloom was oppressive, shadows lurking in every corner like unwanted guests. The team moved cautiously, every creak and groan of the building setting their nerves on edge. "You know," Kiera said, her voice echoing off the walls, "I always thought our job couldn't get any worse. Then we came here." "Just think of it as a paid vacation," Tobin suggested. "With a very high chance of not coming back," Barra added helpfully. They found the source of the signal in a makeshift shrine, the walls covered in symbols and half-mad writings. In the center, a device hummed quietly, oblivious to the chaos around it. "Looks like our signal," Rylan said, examining the machine. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." Kiera moved to assist, her fingers deftly working over the controls. "If this blows up, I just want you all to know. You told us so," Tobin finished for her. "Damn right," she replied with a grin. As the device activated, a holographic image flickered to life, casting an eerie glow over the room. The face of a man appeared, his eyes full of zeal and too much caffeine. "Welcome, Seekers," the hologram began, voice dripping with the kind of condescension only true believers could muster. "You have been chosen to witness the rebirth of our sacred Earth." "Oh great," Barra muttered. "An infomercial," the hologram continued, oblivious to the sarcasm. "Join us in cleansing this world of impurities and be a part of the new order." "Sounds like a party," Tobin deadpanned. Rylan tuned out the rest of the speech, focusing on the implications. Whatever this was, it was big, bigger than a simple signal. A rallying cry for the cult, a promise of something monumental. "We need to get this back to command," Rylan said, powering down the device. "Before the cult decides we're better off as sacrifices." "And here I was hoping for a peaceful day," Barra sighed, shouldering his weapon. "You know what they say," Kiera remarked, heading for the exit. "Hope in one hand, shit in the other, see which fills up first." With that cheerful thought, they made their way back to the ship, the shadows of Earth stretching out behind them like the long fingers of a dying god. As they lifted off, Rylan glanced down at the receding planet, wondering what other tricks it had up its sleeve. Whatever the cult was planning, it was up to them to stop it, or die trying. "Next stop, anywhere but here," Jenna announced as the Elysium soared back into the safety of space. "And with any luck," Rylan said, settling into his seat, "we'll live long enough to regret it." The Elysium rattled its way through the black void like a tin can full of angry cats. Rylan watched Jupiter shrink into a pinprick, a reminder that even the universe's biggest gasbag could eventually shut up. If only his crew were as obliging. "Earth," Barra said, leaning back in his chair with the enthusiasm of a man about to have his teeth pulled. From the frying pan into the industrial-sized dumpster fire. "Looking forward to the smell," Kiera chimed in, her grin more of a malicious slash. "Nothing like ode to desperation and incense to really clear the sinuses." Rylan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Anyone else have fantasies about early retirement on a nice, uninhabited asteroid? Only if it comes with mojitos and a lethal dose of not my problem," Tobin replied, tapping away on his console. The ship's systems hummed around them, occasionally coughing like an interstellar smoker. Jenna's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, you might want to see this." "See what?" The last shreds of my sanity, Rylan grumbled, but he pushed himself out of his seat to head to the cockpit. Barra was right behind him, always the eager shadow. The cockpit screens flickered with data, crackling like an old radio trying to tune into the universe's worst podcast. On the main display, a face shimmered into view, the kind of face that made you want to punch it just in case it was a hologram. Orexia, the cult leader looking like she just stepped off a medieval catwalk, robes billowing with all the drama of a low-budget villain. Her eyes gleamed with the fervor of someone who'd cornered the market on delusion. "Greetings, travelers of the void," she intoned, voice as smooth as oil on a slip-slide. "I am Orexia, chosen to lead humanity into its next glorious phase." "Yeah, I'm sure the universe sent you an engraved invitation," Rylan muttered. "I can feel your disbelief from here," Barra added, folding his arms with a look that could curdle optimism. Orexia continued, either oblivious or just ignoring them, which was fair since they weren't exactly sending fan mail her way. "The signal you have encountered is no mere call to arms. It is a conduit for transformation, a beacon to alter human existence itself." "Sounds more like a New Age spa treatment than a doomsday device," Tobin remarked, poking his head into the cockpit. "Does it come with a foot rub? What's the plan, Captain?" Jenna asked, eyes flicking between screens. Her hands danced over the controls, steady as ever despite the chaos unfolding. "Figure out what she wants, make sure she doesn't get it, and try not to die in the process," Rylan said, ever the pragmatist. Orexia's hologram flickered, her face a mask of serene insanity. "Join us willingly and you will find your place in the new order." "And if we refuse?" Kiera asked, her fingers itching near the trigger of her sidearm, more out of habit than necessity. Old habits and all that. Orexia's smile was as warm as a snake's embrace. "Then you shall serve as an example to others." "Guess that's a no on the foot rub," Tobin said, turning back to his console with a shrug. Jenna cut the feed, the hologram dissolving like sugar in acid, leaving behind only the faint impression of doom. "We're almost in range of Earth's atmosphere. If there's a welcome party, it's gonna be a big one." "Fantastic," Rylan said with all the enthusiasm of a man scheduled for a double root canal. "Let's gear up and see what our new friends have planned." The descent was a symphony of chaos, alarms blaring, the hull rattling with a noise like 1,000 angry bees trapped in a tin drum. The Elysium careened through the atmosphere, slicing through the clouds like an angel on a bender. "Any turbulence, Jenna?" Rylan asked, clinging to his seat as gravity did its best to introduce his stomach to his spine. "Only if you count the impending sense of doom," Jenna replied, eyes fixed on the controls. The ship steadied, leveling out as they passed through the thickest clouds. Below, Earth sprawled like a relic, a museum piece of a planet that had seen better days. Ruins jutted from the overgrown landscape like the bones of some ancient beast, long dead and forgotten. "Looks like a fixer-upper," Kiera said, peering out the viewport. "If you've got a few millennia and unlimited patience," Barra added. "Neither of which we have. Or want," Rylan concluded. They touched down in a clearing, the landing rough but survivable, which in their line of work counted as a win. Rylan unbuckled his harness, mentally preparing himself for another round of Guess the Cultist's crazy plan. "Last chance to back out," he announced, already knowing the answer. "Not unless you plan on carrying me," Kiera replied, already strapping on her gear. "And I'm heavier than I look," Tobin snorted. "Only thing heavier than you is your attitude." "Enough flirting, you two," Barra snapped, leading the way to the exit. "We've got a planet to save or die trying." "Someone's optimistic," Rylan said, falling in step beside him. "Someone has to be," Barra shot back, though his eyes held a glint of what might have been humor or madness. "Hard to tell these days." The air outside was a cocktail of decay and nostalgia, a nostalgic reminder of why Rylan avoided Earth like an ancient ex. The team moved out, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. "Signals coming from that direction," Tobin said, pointing toward a cluster of ruins that looked like they'd been designed by a particularly avant-garde architect. "Let's get this over with," Ryland said, leading the way. The ruins loomed around them, shadows deepening in the waning light. It was the kind of place that practically screamed trap, but then, when did they ever have the luxury of playing it safe? "What do you think Orexia wants with the signal?" Kiera asked, keeping her voice low. "Something world-ending, probably," Ryland replied. "These cult types love their apocalypses. Like pineapple on pizza," Barra added. "It's an acquired taste. They found the source of the signal in a large chamber, once a theater or temple, now a gathering place for the terminally devout. The device sat at the center, a mass of wires and screens glowing with unholy light." Rylan approached cautiously, the air heavy with anticipation. "This is it. Whatever Orexia's planning, it starts here." "So," Tobin said, scanning the device, "anyone know how to turn off Armageddon?" Kiera moved to the console, already working her magic. "Give me a minute." Ahead, the shadows shifted, and Orexia stepped into view, flanked by her followers, all draped in robes and fanaticism. "So good of you to join us," she said, hands spread wide in a gesture of welcome that was anything but. "Wouldn't miss it," Rylan replied, keeping his weapon trained on her, "though your invitation got lost in the mail." Orexia's smile was as false as a politician's promise. "You are here at a pivotal moment. With this signal we will reshape humanity, purging it of its flaws." "And what makes you qualified to play God?" Barra demanded, all sharp edges and defiance. "Simple," Orexia replied. "Faith." Kiera cursed under her breath, fingers dancing over the controls. "Captain, this thing's wired to broadcast a signal across the globe. If it goes off, who knows what it'll do?" "Nothing good, I'll bet," Tobin said. "Can you disable it?" Rylan asked, eyes flicking between Kiera and Orexia's zealots. "I can try," Kiera replied, "but it's like defusing a bomb while someone's throwing knives at you." Orexia stepped closer, eyes gleaming with unholy light. "Join us, Captain. Witness the dawn of a new era." Rylan met her gaze, seeing madness and belief intertwined, a dangerous cocktail that rarely ended well for anyone. "Not today." With a nod, Kiera made her move, fingers flying across the console as the room erupted into chaos. Orexia's followers rushed forward, weapons drawn, a wave of zeal and desperation. Rylan fired, the others following suit, the air filled with the crack of gunfire and the screams of the dying. The cultists fell, dropping like marionettes with their strings cut. Orexia stood back, untouched, her expression one of serene inevitability. "Even if you destroy this, others will follow. The signal cannot be silenced." Rylan pushed forward, reaching the console as Kiera finished her work. "Let's hope you're wrong." With a final tap, the device powered down, the screens flickering to black. For a moment, silence reigned, heavy and oppressive, the weight of what they'd done settling over them. Orexia's smile was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. "You've only delayed the inevitable, story of my life," Rylan replied, lowering his weapon. "Now do us all a favor and surrender. You've lost." Orexia hesitated, the weight of her beliefs warring with reality. Finally, she lowered her head, the fight leaving her. Barra stepped forward, securing her hands with cuffs. "Guess you're going to see the new world from behind bars." As they made their way back to the Elysium, Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The signal might be silenced, but the threat it posed lingered, a shadow over humanity's future. "You think we'll ever catch a break?" Kiera asked as they boarded, exhaustion tinging her voice. Rylan paused, considering. "Maybe one day. But not today." With that, they left Earth behind, the stars beckoning them back into the void, a reminder that in the universe's grand game of cosmic roulette, they were just waiting for the next cruel joke. The Elysium, much like Earth's best intentions, was now only half functional. Its engines sputtered like a wheezing old man, and if ships could have arthritis, this one was a prime candidate. The sabotage had caught them with their pants down, figuratively speaking, though Tobin's insistence on wearing shorts in space meant he was closer to literal than the rest. "How's she holding up, Jenna?" Rylan asked, feigning optimism like a man applying for parole. "About as well as a cardboard boat in a hurricane," Jenna replied, not looking up from her screens. "The Zealots did a number on our fuel lines, and there's some kind of signal interference screwing with navigation." "Interference," Rylan echoed, already suspecting the universe was prepping its next joke at their expense. "Yeah," Jenna confirmed. "Like someone decided static was the soundtrack we needed for our impending doom." "Great," Rylan grumbled, rubbing his temples. "Any chance we can limp to the nearest station before we fall out of the sky? More like crawl," Barra chimed in, his tone as dry as a Martian summer. "And that's if the engines don't decide to pack up and leave mid-flight." Kiera, ever the pragmatist, slapped a fresh power cell into her handheld and looked at Rylan. "What's the plan, Captain?" "Besides trying not to die horribly, I mean." Rylan scowled, a look he'd perfected over years of commanding a ship that seemed to be a magnet for trouble. "There's a station not too far from here. The kind of place that makes you question why you ever left the comfort of a collapsing hellscape like Earth." Jenna pulled up the station's specs, her fingers dancing across the console. "Looks like a mining outpost. Barely a step above a floating junkyard, but they've got repair facilities." "Perfect," Tobin said with a sigh. "A floating garbage heap, just what we need." "Hey, don't knock it," Barra interjected. "Better a junkyard in space than a graveyard in orbit." Rylan nodded, already plotting their course. "All right. Let's get patched up and try not to get mugged by space hobos while we're at it." The Elysium limped through the void like a wounded animal, systems creaking in protest as they made their way to the station. The crew did what they could to patch things up, but it was like trying to fix a leaky dam with chewing gum and wishful thinking. As they approached the station, it loomed into view like a rusty leviathan, held together by hope and a large quantity of duct tape. Rylan had seen prettier scrapyards. "Docking sequence initiated," Jenna announced, her voice a mix of relief and resignation. "Let's hope they've got a mechanic who's not a complete lunatic." "Or a cultist," Kiera added, always the optimist. The docking process was rough, as though the station had taken a personal dislike to their ship. But they managed to dock without the Elysium falling apart completely. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Rylan led the crew out, their boots clanking against the station's metal floors. The air was thick with the scent of oil and despair, a familiar bouquet for anyone accustomed to life on the fringes of civilization. "Welcome to paradise," Barra muttered, eyeing the grim surroundings. "Population, us." As they made their way through the station, they encountered the usual array of colorful characters: disgruntled miners, dubious engineers, and the occasional opportunist looking to make a quick credit. It was the kind of place where a person's morals were as flexible as their credit lines. Rylan spotted the station's chief engineer, a wiry woman named Verna with a face that said she'd seen everything and been unimpressed by most of it. She regarded them with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice a gravelly rasp that suggested she used it to sand furniture in her spare time. "A whole arm, actually," Rylan replied, mustering up his most charming grin, which, given the situation, was about as charming as a cat with its tail on fire. "Our ship's a bit under the weather, fuel lines mostly." Verna nodded, already mentally assessing the cost. "We'll get you set up, but it's gonna cost. Nothing's free in this galaxy, especially not miracles," Rylan sighed. "We're not looking for miracles. Just enough of a patch job to get us back on our feet, or thrusters, as it were." Verna grunted, motioning them to follow. "You'll be lucky if you can crawl out of here, but I'll see what I can do." As they followed her down the endless corridors, Rylan considered their next move. The sabotage had been a setback, but the real issue was the signal. If they didn't figure out how to neutralize it, Aurexia's insanity could still spread like an interstellar plague. While Verna's team worked on the ship, Rylan took the opportunity to dig into the station's archives, hoping to uncover more about the signal. What he found was a relic from humanity's past, a fragment of ancient technology, recorded in the station's logs as a curiosity. "Found something interesting," he announced to the crew gathered around a dusty terminal. "Looks like this station's been sitting on a piece of old tech that might be linked to the signal." Kiera leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the display. "Antique tech? How exactly is that supposed to help us stop a doomsday cult?" "Think of it as the original source code," Rylan replied. "If we can understand how it works, maybe we can shut down their signal for good." Barra frowned, skepticism etched across his face like a permanent feature. "And you think this ancient relic is just going to hand us the answers?" Rylan shrugged. "It's as good a shot as any. Besides, what have we got to lose?" "Our lives," Tobin suggested, ever the ray of sunshine. "Details," Rylan shot back, turning back to the terminal. "Let's see what makes this thing tick." With the crew's help, they managed to locate the relic buried deep within the station's forgotten storage. It was an odd-looking device, all wires and metal plates, like someone had taken a toaster and made it angry. Jenna examined it closely, her analytical mind already working over possibilities. "If this thing is tied to the signal, it might have the data we need to counteract it. Or it could explode in our faces. Is that a risk we're willing to take?" Barra asked, crossing his arms. "We don't have much choice," Rylan replied, ever the pragmatist. "Let's get it back to the ship and see what we can do." Verna's team had done their job well enough. The Elysium was patched up and ready to limp back into action. With the relic in hand, they returned to the ship, hopeful in the way only desperate people can be. As they fired up the engines, Rylan took a moment to ponder their situation. They had a half-functioning ship, a relic from a bygone era and a galaxy full of trouble. But as always, that was more than enough to keep them busy. "Everyone ready?" he asked, eyeing the crew with a wry smile. "Ready as we'll ever be," Kiera replied, buckling in. "Let's get this show on the road, then," Rylan said, setting their course away from the station and toward whatever awaited them next. The Elysium rumbled to life, a mechanical protest that sounded suspiciously like a death rattle, but it held together, and soon they were back amidst the stars, the station receding into the void behind them. With the relic now safely in their possession, the crew gathered in the main hold, where Jenna had set up a makeshift lab to dissect the ancient device. "What do you think?" Rylan asked, watching as Jenna poked and prodded the relic like it was a particularly frustrating puzzle. "I think," Jenna replied, "that whoever built this either had too much or too little time on their hands. Either way, it's got more layers than a bureaucrat's filing cabinet." Kiera raised an eyebrow. "And it's supposed to help us how?" "If I can access its data," Jenna said, "we might be able to trace the signal back to its origins or shut it down entirely." Rylan nodded, feeling that familiar sense of cautious hope. "Then let's crack this thing open and see what secrets it's hiding." The crew worked together, each bringing their own skills to the task. It was a strange sort of camaraderie, born of necessity, and the shared understanding that their lives were perpetually on the line. As Jenna delved deeper into the relic's workings, she uncovered a series of codes and data streams, woven into the device like a spider's web. It was a language of sorts, a whisper from the past that might just hold the key to their future. "Look at this," she said, excitement creeping into her voice. "There's a pattern here, something that corresponds with the signal's frequency. But can we use it?" Barra asked, ever the skeptic. Jenna grinned, a rare sight that suggested she might have actually found a silver lining. "I think we can. If we can sync this data with the ship systems, we might just be able to jam the signal and cut Orexia off at the source." Rylan clapped a hand on her shoulder. "Well done. Let's get this set up and see if we can finally get ahead of the universe's cruel jokes for once." As they prepared to integrate the relic's data with the Elysium systems, Rylan allowed himself a moment of hope. They were far from out of the woods, but with a little luck, they might just have the edge they needed to turn the tide. And in a universe that delighted in chaos, that was more than they'd ever dared to hope for. Rylan Vex, captain of the barely holding together Elysium, stood in the cramped makeshift lab where the crew had laid out the relic. their last hope in shutting down Aurexia's signal. The thing looked like a toaster with a vendetta, but maybe, just maybe, it could save their skins. Rylan had seen crazier plans succeed, usually right before everything went horribly wrong. So, this ancient doodad might be the key to unimaginable power, huh? Tobin asked, scratching his head as he peered at the relic. Wonder why they buried it on a floating junk heap like our friendly neighborhood mining outpost. Because most people would rather ignore history than learn from it, Kiera replied, poking at the relic with her handheld device. And because it's safer to keep possibly world-ending devices away from curious hands, which, ironically, is exactly what we're doing. Barra crossed his arms, his skepticism practically tangible. I bet the thing's just a glorified paperweight. If it were that important, someone would have done more than shove it in a forgotten corner of a station that smells like rust and regret. Regardless, Jenna interjected, her voice calm amidst the banter, we need to understand what this thing can do. If the zealots are after it, there's got to be more to it than meets the eye. Or they've just got really bad taste in relics. Rylan sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't care if it plays classical music or makes toast. If it can help us stop Aurexia, it's worth the trouble. Let's get this thing integrated and see what tunes it can play. The crew set to work, each member falling into the rhythm of desperation-fueled teamwork. Wires were attached, data was streamed, and curses were muttered under breath. It was all very technical and terribly chaotic in the way most last-minute plans tend to be. As Jenna worked her magic on the relic, Rylan found himself reevaluating their precarious situation. They were stuck in a tin can of a ship, limping through the galaxy with engines that wheezed like an asthmatic geriatric. The zealots were closing in, itching to reclaim what they believed was their divine right. And here they were, tinkering with a relic that could either save them or blow them to bits, all in a day's work. Data's coming through, Jenna announced, eyes glued to the screen as she deciphered the relic's secrets. Looks like it really was a control device for something massive, something that could manipulate frequencies across vast distances. So, Aurexia's playing with a space toy that can mess with our heads. Great, Barra drawled, unimpressed. Nothing like a bit of brainwashing to spice up the day. Kiera shook her head, her voice laced with sarcasm. Yeah, because regular space travel isn't exciting enough. We need existential threats and cultists to keep us on our toes. Think about it, Tobin said, pointing at the screen. If we can reverse engineer this thing, maybe we can send Aurexia's signal back at her. Give her a taste of her own medicine. Rylan chuckled, a dry sound like leaves crunching underfoot. I'm all for poetic justice, but we'll have to move fast. If Aurexia figures out we're onto something, she'll be on us quicker than a politician on a scandal. The crew continued their work, piecing together the relic's secrets like a cosmic jigsaw puzzle. Rylan watched them, feeling that odd mix of pride and impending doom. They were a ragtag bunch, more likely to argue over the last cup of coffee than save the universe, but they'd stuck together through thick and thin. And if that wasn't a miracle, he didn't know what was. Incoming transmission, Jenna announced, breaking the relative silence. She tapped a few keys and the screen flickered to life, displaying a video feed of a gaunt figure in robes that screamed cult leader. Aurexia, Rylan muttered, frowning at the screen. What does our favorite zealot want now? Aurexia's voice was smooth, almost charming like the purr of a cat just before it claws your eyes out. Captain Vex, I trust you've been enjoying your little treasure hunt, but I'm afraid your time is up. Return what's mine and I might consider sparing your crew. Rylan couldn't help but grin, all teeth and defiance. Sorry, but we've grown attached to our new paperweight. Besides, we're not big on sharing with megalomaniacs. Aurexia's smile was thin, her patience thinner. You think you can defy destiny, Captain? The signal is the path to enlightenment. You stand in the way of progress. Progress? Barra snorted. More like mass hysteria wrapped in a pretty package. Kiera chimed in, rolling her eyes. Destiny? Enlightenment. Sounds like someone overdosed on their own propaganda. Tobin, ever the voice of reason, or madness depending on the day, added, "If your path to enlightenment involves brainwashing the galaxy, you might want to rethink your marketing strategy." Aurexia's expression darkened, her eyes like twin voids. "This is your final warning, Captain. Return the relic or face the consequences." The transmission cut out, leaving the crew with nothing but the hum of the ship and the weight of Aurexia's threat hanging over them like a guillotine. "Well," Ryland said, breaking the tension with a wry smile, "looks like we've got her attention." "Yeah, and her bloodlust," Barra remarked, glancing at the relic with renewed determination. "Let's make sure we send her signal straight to hell." Jenna nodded, focused once more on the relic's data. "We're close to cracking it. If we can integrate this with the Elysium systems, we might be able to scramble her signal long enough to give us an edge." Ryland stood, surveying his crew, a motley collection of cynics and dreamers, united by the absurdity of their predicament. "We've come this far. Let's finish what we started and show Aurexia what happens when you mess with the wrong crew." With a plan in place and every ounce of luck they could muster, the crew prepared for the final push. The stakes were higher than a space elevator, and the odds were stacked against them, but there was something exhilarating about facing down certain doom with nothing but wits and a half-functional spaceship. As the Elysium roared to life, engines rattling like a bag of bones, Ryland felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. They might not have much, but they had each other, and a relic that could change everything for better or worse. "All right, folks," Ryland called out, his voice steady amidst the chaos. "Let's give Aurexia a show she won't forget." The crew worked feverishly, watching as Jenna synchronized the relic's data with the Elysium systems. The ship thrummed with energy, an undercurrent of potential that buzzed like static in the air. "Signals ready," Jenna announced, her fingers flying across the console. "We can disrupt her transmission, but it'll only buy us time. We need to be ready to move when the window opens." Ryland nodded, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like an old jacket. "Barra, get us clear of the station. Kiera, keep an eye on the sensors. Tobin, prep for evasive maneuvers. We're gonna make our stand here." As the crew scrambled to their stations, Ryland settled into the captain's seat, the familiar creak of worn leather grounding him amidst the uncertainty. The universe might love its cruel jokes, but they'd be damned if they'd let that stop them now. The Elysium surged forward, breaking free of the station's orbit with a grace that belied its battered frame. Ryland watched the stars streak by, each point of light a reminder of everything they were fighting for. "Incoming ships," Kiera warned, her voice a thread of tension. "Looks like the zealots brought friends." Ryland's lips curled into a wolfish grin. "Good. Let's show them how we do things out here on the fringes." With a flick of a switch, Jenna activated the relic's counter signal, sending a pulse of energy rippling through space. The screens flickered, displaying the interference as it spread, disrupting Aurexia's transmissions and throwing her forces into disarray. "Nice work," Ryland said, watching as the enemy ships wavered, their coordination unraveling like a poorly knit sweater. "Now let's get out of here before they regroup." The Elysium danced through the chaos, a deft ballet of metal and momentum as Tobin took the helm, guiding them through the enemy ranks with a skill born of desperation and madness. "Hang on tight," Tobin called, his voice a mix of excitement and panic. "This is gonna be a bumpy ride." The ship lurched, engines straining as they weaved through the gauntlet of enemy fire. Ryland could feel the vibrations thrumming under his feet, the hum of the relic's power a constant backdrop to the chaos. As the last of the zealot ships fell away, leaving nothing but the void and the promise of freedom, Ryland let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Looks like we made it," Barra said, his voice tinged with relief. "For now," Jenna added, ever the realist. "But Aurexia won't give up that easily. She's still out there, and she'll come at us harder now." Ryland nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. They'd won a small victory, but the war was far from over. Aurexia was still out there, a shadow lurking at the edges of their reality, and she'd stop at nothing to reclaim what she believed was hers. But for the moment, They'd bought themselves time, a precious commodity in a universe that thrived on chaos and uncertainty. And with time came opportunity, the chance to regroup, to strategize, to find a way to turn the tables on their relentless adversary. "Let's keep moving," Ryland said, his gaze fixed on the stars. "We've got a long way to go, and the road ahead isn't getting any easier, but we'll face whatever comes our way together." With that, the Elysium powered through the void, a defiant beacon of resistance against the darkness that sought to consume them. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and they'd fight to protect it with every ounce of stubborn resolve they had. In a universe where the odds were never in their favor, Rylan and his crew had learned to make their own luck. And as the stars bore witness to their journey, they knew that whatever the future held, they'd face it on their own terms, snark, cynicism, and all. The Elysium groaned like an old man getting up from an especially comfortable chair. Rylan peered at the cockpit screens, his scowl deepening as the zealot ships swarmed around the station like a pack of rabid dogs sensing an easy meal. "Well, this escalated quickly," he muttered, gripping the arms of his seat. "Anyone got a bright idea, or are we counting on dumb luck again?" "Luck's got us this far," Barra quipped, her fingers flying over the controls. "But I wouldn't bet the farm on it." "Too late," Ryland said, his voice laced with dry amusement. "Our farm was repossessed last Tuesday. The situation had gone from bad to worse, as it tended to in their line of work. If the universe had a sense of humor, it was the kind that involved whoopee cushions and fake lottery tickets." Kiera glanced up from her handheld, her eyes flicking between the relic and the chaos outside. "We could try using the technology to communicate directly with the signal. If it works, we might be able to disrupt their coordination. Or fry our brains in the process," Tobin added, ever the optimist. "But hey, what's a little brain damage between friends?" Ryland sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we've got. Jenna, how's that integration coming?" Jenna's hands danced across the console with a precision that was almost poetic, if anything about their situation could be called poetry. "I've linked the relic to the Elysium systems. We can attempt to piggyback on the signal, but it'll be risky. We could end up broadcasting our location galaxy-wide." "Great," Ryland said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "I always wanted to star in my own radio show, Captain Vex and the Suicide Mission." "Catchy title," Barra noted, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Maybe we'll get a cult following." "Just what we need," Ryland snorted. More cults. The zealot ships moved in closer, their formation tight and intimidating. Auraxia had sent them with a purpose, and it wasn't to exchange pleasantries over tea. The Elysium was outgunned, outmanned, and out of time. "Everyone listen up," Ryland said, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is our last stand. We can't win in a straight fight, so we'll have to get creative. Jenna, prep the relic. Barra, keep us moving. Kiera and Tobin, eyes on the sensors. Let's make sure Auraxia remembers our names." The crew sprang into action, each member focused on their task. It was a beautiful kind of chaos, the kind that made Ryland proud to have them by his side, even as they hurtled toward potential oblivion. "Relic's ready," Jenna announced, her voice calm amidst the storm. "Engaging now." The Elysium vibrated with a low hum, the relic's power coursing through the ship systems like a live wire. On the screens, the zealot ships flickered, their maneuvers stuttering as the signal scrambled their communications. "Nice work, Jenna," Ryland said, feeling a flicker of hope. "Let's see how they handle a little chaos of their own." But hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed under the weight of reality. The zealots regrouped with unnerving speed, their ships closing in with a determination that was almost impressive, if you weren't on the receiving end. "Incoming," Kiera shouted, her voice sharp as a blade. "They're locking weapons." The Elysium shuddered under the impact of the first volley, the screens lighting up with warnings and damage reports. "Shields are barely holding," Barra called out, her hands steady on the controls. "We can't take much more of this." Ryland's mind raced, every option more desperate than the last. They needed a game changer, something that would tip the scales in a universe that loved stacking the deck. "We need to go deeper," Ryland said, a wild idea taking shape. "We've got to use the signal to send them a message they can't ignore." "Are you insane?" Barra snapped, though there was a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "That could backfire spectacularly." "Spectacular's what we're aiming for," Ryland replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Jenna, can you boost the signal's output? Make it loud enough that even Aurexia's got to listen." Jenna hesitated for a second, then nodded, determination sharpening her features. "I can try, but if it goes wrong, we'll be dead before we know it," Tobin interjected, a wry grin on his face. "Could be worse." "Exactly," Ryland said, his voice steady. "Let's give it everything we've got. If we're going out, we're taking them with us." The crew moved with renewed purpose, their actions a testament to their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The Elysium thrummed with energy, the relic's presence a palpable force that seemed to pulse in time with the ship's heart. "Signals amplified," Jenna announced, her fingers flying over the console. "Ready to transmit on your command." "Do it," Ryland said, his voice a low growl of defiance. The Elysium system surged, the relic's power cascading through the ship, coalescing into a single potent transmission. It blasted out into the void, a beacon of defiance in the darkness, a challenge to Aurexia and her followers. The Zealot ships faltered, their formation collapsing as the signal overwhelmed their systems. For a moment, it seemed they'd done it, that they'd turned the tide. But the universe had never been one to let victories come easily. The Elysium systems flickered, the strain of the signal too much for the ship's battered infrastructure. The engines sputtered, then died, leaving them adrift in the void. "Well, that was fun while it lasted," Barra muttered, her voice tight with frustration as she fought to restart the engines. "Any more brilliant ideas?" Ryland's mind churned, his thoughts a chaotic tangle of possibilities. The relic was their last, best hope, a double-edged sword that could cut both ways. "We've got one more play," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Jenna, can you modulate the signal? If we can destabilize their systems long enough, we might be able to get the engines back online and make a run for it." Jenna's brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers a blur as she worked. "I can try, but it'll take everything we've got left." "Then let's make it count," Ryland said, his gaze sweeping over his crew, his expression fierce and unyielding. "We're not going down without a fight." The seconds stretched into eternity as Jenna worked, the tension in the cabin a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the Zealots regrouped once more, their ships bearing down with relentless intent. "Ready," Jenna said at last, her voice a quiet echo of the storm raging outside. "Engaging now." The Elysium shuddered as the signal pulsed out once more, a desperate gambit that sent tendrils of interference snaking through the Zealot systems. Their ships staggered, their weapons falling silent as chaos rippled through their ranks. "Engines are back online," Barra shouted, triumph in her voice. "We're not dead yet." "Let's move," Ryland said, adrenaline surging through his veins as the Elysium roared to life, engines burning with renewed vigor. The ship surged forward, a battered phoenix rising from the ashes, cutting through the chaos with a purpose that defied the odds stacked against them. The Zealots fell away, their formation shattered, their pursuit a disorganized mess. "Looks like we've got a window," Tobin called out, his voice a mix of relief and exhilaration. "Where to, Captain?" Ryland leaned back in his seat, exhaustion creeping in at the edges of his consciousness. They'd bought themselves time, a precious, fleeting moment in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough. "Anywhere but here," Ryland replied, a hint of humor threading through his words. "Let's find somewhere to lick our wounds and plan our next move. We've still got a war to win." The Elysium powered through the void, an indomitable spirit in a universe that thrived on crushing spirits. They'd faced their darkest ire and emerged stronger for it, a ragtag crew bound by their shared defiance, their refusal to give in. As the stars streaked past, Ryland allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Orexia and her zealots might be relentless, but they'd underestimated the power of stubbornness, of resilience, of a crew that refused to back down. "Onward, then," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the horizon, on the promise of another day. "Let's see what else the universe has in store for us." And with that, the Elysium sailed into the black, a testament to the indomitable will of those who dared to defy the darkness. The Elysium drifted through the void, its engines humming like an asthmatic cat. The crew, worn but not defeated, gathered around the cockpit, where Rylan Vex was wrestling with the latest piece of cosmic bad news. "Well, that was a nice bit of fireworks," Tobin said, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't even have time to say ouch." "Always the bright side with you, Tobin," Ryland said, eyeing the flickering console with a mix of dread and resignation. "Just once I'd like for things to go as planned. Is that too much to ask?" "Yes," Barra interjected, her eyes glued to the latest damage reports. "In this universe." "Absolutely." Kiera, still clutching her handheld like it was a security blanket, glanced at the tangled mess of data streaming across the screens. "So, about that signal. What the hell did we just unleash?" "Something either brilliant or catastrophically stupid," Rylan replied, rubbing his temples. "Pick your favorite." "I'll take catastrophically stupid for 500, Jenna chimed in, barely looking up from her console. Her fingers danced over the keys, trying to coax some sense from the chaos they'd created. "Jenna, any idea what our little message in a bottle said?" Rylan asked, leaning over her shoulder. Jenna sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It seems like the signal was piggybacking on every scrap of data we had. It's like sending 1,000 angry emails and accidentally CCing the galaxy." "Oops," Tobin said, grinning. "Hope the spam filters are up to date." "Forget the spam," Barra snapped. "What if we just told the cult where we keep our spare keys?" "The good news," Jenna continued, ignoring Barra's doomsaying, "is that the signal might have a hidden function. It could potentially disrupt more than just their comms, maybe even their whole operation." "Now there's a silver lining," Ryland said, trying to sound more hopeful than he felt. "And the bad news," Jenna replied, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is that if we use it wrong it could take out more than just their systems. It could trigger a chain reaction and well, boom, boom," Barra repeated flatly, her lips twisting into a sardonic smile. "That's always been my favorite way to end the day." Ryland turned away from the group, his mind grappling with the implications. "So you're saying we could either free Earth from the cult's grip or accidentally turn it into a new asteroid belt?" "Pretty much," Jenna said, shrugging. "It's a 50-50 gamble." "Well, nothing like high stakes to keep things interesting," Tobin quipped, earning him a glare from Barra. "What's it gonna be, Captain?" Kiera asked, a nervous edge to her voice. "Do we roll the dice?" Ryland paused, the weight of their options pressing down on him like the universe's worst hangover. "What do we know about this signal? Where did it come from?" Jenna tapped a few keys, pulling up a star map that looked like it had seen better days. "It's old tech, ancient even, pre-cult, pre-us probably. Like finding an old cassette tape in a digital world." "Great, so we're dealing with the galactic equivalent of a Betamax," Ryland muttered. "But why was it on that mining outpost?" "It might have been hidden there to keep it out of the cult's hands," Kiera suggested, her eyes bright with curiosity. "A relic from before the madness. A way to fight back. Or a trap set by the universe to screw us over," Barra said, ever the optimist. Ryland paced the cabin, trying to piece together the fractured puzzle. "If it's as old as you say, then maybe there's a reason it was forgotten. Or maybe, just maybe, it was meant to be found." "And used," Jenna added, her eyes locking with Ryland's. "But used wisely." "Well, thank heavens we're known for our wisdom," Tobin snickered. "Right, team." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade, each crew member considering the gamble they were about to make. It was clear what was at stake, but the path to avoiding disaster was as foggy as a Jovian morning. "So what do we do?" Kiera asked, her gaze flicking between the faces of her crewmates. "This could be the chance we've been waiting for. We could liberate Earth," Jenna said, her voice carrying the weight of hope and dread. But if we mess up? Boom, Barra repeated, her eyes hard but not without a glimmer of resolve. There was silence, the kind that swallows words and leaves only thoughts. Rylan looked over his crew, their faces a medley of fear, hope, and determination. Each of them knew the stakes, knew the risks, and yet they stood ready, ever defiant in the face of overwhelming odds. "We're not dead yet," Rylan said at last, his voice firm and steady. "And as long as we're breathing, we've got a chance to make things right." "Then let's make it count," Tobin said, clapping his hands together. "What's life without a little existential dread, eh?" "Prepping the signal for Earth," Jenna said, her fingers flying over the keys. "If we're doing this, we need to do it soon, before Orexia and her lackeys realize what's happening." "Right," Rylan said, nodding. "We'll set course for Earth. If we're going to play this hand, we need to play it where it matters most." "Back to the land of milk and honey," Barra said with a snort. "Or what's left of it anyway. Anyone else got the feeling we're about to be the least welcome guests at a very exclusive party?" Kiera asked, her grin sharp as a knife. "Wouldn't be the first time," Tobin replied, chuckling. "And if we're lucky, not the last." The Elysium, engines now humming with a newfound purpose, altered its course, its trajectory set for the cradle of humanity and its current bedlam of zealotry. The crew, unified in their resolve, prepared for the next chapter in their seemingly endless saga of near-death experiences. "Let's hope this old tech knows a few tricks," Rylan murmured, eyes fixed on the impending horizon that promised nothing but trouble. "And let's hope we're not just writing our own obituaries," Barra muttered, her hands never still on the controls. The journey was tense, the usual chatter subdued by the gravity of their mission. Each crew member was trapped in their own thoughts, the weight of their decisions pressing down on them, but each resolved to see it through to the bitter end, or a new beginning, if fate was feeling particularly kind. Rylan was in the cockpit, staring at the swirling mass of stars that zipped by. "You ever wonder why we do this? Risk everything for a chance, a possibility. Because what's the alternative?" Barra replied, sliding into a seat beside him. "Sit around and wait for the universe to eat us alive? No thanks." "Yeah," Rylan chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. "Guess we're gluttons for punishment." "You know what they say," Barra said, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "No guts, no glory." "More like no brains, no pain," Rylan countered, smirking. "But here's to hoping we have enough of the former to avoid too much of the latter." The Elysium hurtled towards Earth, each second drawing them closer to the unknown. As they closed in on their destination, the familiar blue and green orb came into view, a stark reminder of what was at stake, of what they were fighting for. "Almost there," Kiera announced, her eyes glued to the sensors. "No sign of any welcoming committee yet." "Give it time," Tobin said, stretching his arms. "We always make an entrance." "Jenna, how's that signal looking?" Rylan asked, turning his attention to where she sat, hunched over her console. "Ready to go," Jenna replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We can initiate the burst as soon as we're in position. And once we do, there's no turning back," Barra added, her tone leaving no room for doubt. They were committed, for better or worse. "Here's to making history," Rylan said, raising an imaginary glass, "or at least not ending up as a cautionary tale." The tension was palpable as they reached Earth's orbit, the planet looming large and bright beneath them. The crew held their collective breath, each knowing that their next move could change everything or end it all. "On my mark," Rylan said, his voice clear and resolute. 3, 2, 1, now." Jenna hit the button, unleashing the signal with all the force they could muster. It screamed across the void, a chorus of forgotten voices, old and new, merging into one. The gamble had begun. "Now we wait and see if we've just saved humanity," Tobin quipped, his voice tinged with gallows humor, "or if we're about to get a front row seat to the fireworks." "Hold on to your hats," Barra said, her fingers dancing over the controls. "This ride's about to get bumpy." The crew watched as the signal spread, cascading through the ether, reaching out to touch every corner of the Earth below. The tension was a living thing, wrapping around them, squeezing tight. And then slowly the chaos began to unravel. The cult's networks flickered, their signals disrupted, their grasp on Earth slipping as the ancient technology worked its magic. It was a start, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. "Look at that," Kiera breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's working." "Well, I'll be damned," Barra said, a genuine smile breaking through her usual veneer of cynicism. "We might actually pull this off." "Don't jinx it," Rylan warned, though he couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. "We've still got a long way to go." The Elysium hung in orbit, a silent witness to the unfolding drama below. The stakes were high, the risks monumental, but they'd taken the first step in a journey that could change everything. "Here's to the crazy ones," Tobin said, raising a hand in salute. "The dreamers and the doers, or in our case, the utterly insane." The crew laughed, the tension easing ever so slightly as they watched their gamble pay off, at least for the moment. There was still much to do, still so many ways it could all go wrong. But for now, they'd take the victory, however small. "Onward," Ryland said, his voice filled with determination, "to whatever comes next." And with that, the Elysium continued its vigil, a steadfast presence in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. The Elysium continued its orbit, a patient sentinel watching over the chaos below. Inside the ship, Rylan Vex paced like a caged animal, his mind racing faster than the quantum processors on board. The signal had worked at least partially, but now came the hard part, dealing with Orexia and her motley crew of zealots. Like trying to negotiate with a rabid dog, only this dog had a cult and a taste for religious extremism. "Captain," Barra said, her voice slicing through his thoughts like a well-aimed dagger, "we've got company. Zealot ships coming in fast." "Of course we have," Rylan muttered, rolling his eyes. "Why wouldn't they be? It's not like we're ever allowed a moment of peace." Tobin, ever the optimist, leaned back in his chair, his feet propped up on the console. "Well, at least it's not boring." "I was worried we might have to resort to a game of space charades." "Save the charades for later," Ryland said, peering at the approaching ships through the cockpit screens. They looked like a swarm of angry hornets out for blood and oblivion. "What's our play?" Kiera asked, her handheld clutched tight, fingers dancing nervously across its surface. "Signals reeling them in, which means it's time to test just how much havoc it can really cause," Barra replied, her eyes fixed on the controls. "Let's see if we can disrupt their systems enough to make them rethink their life choices." Jenna, having finished the initial broadcast, leaned back and rubbed her temples. "I've got the signal calibrated to target their communication arrays. With any luck, it'll scramble their orders and sow a bit of chaos." "Chaos is good," Ryland said with a grim smile. "Chaos we can work with." "And if it doesn't work?" Tobin asked, though not without a smirk. "Do we get to say 'I told you so'? If it doesn't work, we'll be too busy dodging plasma to say much of anything," Ryland shot back. "But let's not dwell on maybes. We're in this mess together." The first wave of zealot ships broke formation, their sleek, predatory shapes slicing through space with deadly precision. The tension in the cockpit was a living thing, coiling around the crew as they prepared for the worst. "Ready the signal," Rylan ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command, "and let's give them something to think about." "Consider it done," Jenna replied, her fingers flying over the console as she fine-tuned the frequency. "Let's see how they handle a little cognitive dissonance." As the signal pulsed out from the Elysium, a strange, almost hypnotic hum filled the ship, a low, thrumming sound that tickled the back of Ryland's mind. He could almost feel it reaching out, a spectral hand gripping the zealot ships in its unseen grasp. "Here goes nothing," Kiera breathed, her eyes wide as she watched the screens. Moment of truth, folks. The first sign that the signal was working came as one of the zealot ships veered sharply off course, spiraling away like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. Then another, and another, each ship caught in the throes of the signal's interference. "Look at that," Barra said, her voice colored with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. "They're dancing like marionettes." "Marionettes with plasma cannons," Rylan reminded her, though he couldn't help the grin tugging at his lips. But yeah, it's a start. The Zealots, for all their fanaticism, were nothing if not tenacious. As their ships faltered, they regrouped, struggling to maintain cohesion as the signal played havoc with their systems. It was a battle of wills, technology against dogma, and for the moment technology had the upper hand. "Captain," Tobin called out, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere, "we've got a message coming through. It's Orexia." Ryland's smile vanished, replaced by a grim determination. "Put her on." The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Orexia, the cult leader who had become the unwelcome face of humanity's darkest hour. Her eyes burned with a fanatic's fire, and her smile was a thing of brittle malice. "Captain Ryland Vex," she purred, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "I must admit, your audacity is impressive. But you cannot hope to stand against the tide of destiny." "Destiny, huh?" Ryland replied, leaning forward with a sardonic grin. "Funny, I thought that was just a fancy word for poor life choices." Orexia's eyes narrowed, her smile turning cold. "You may disrupt our communications, but you cannot stop us. The faithful will endure and the false will be swept away." "Must be nice," Tobin interjected, "having that kind of confidence. I usually just settle for hoping my socks match." Ryland cut in, keeping his tone light. "Look, Orexia, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. But last I checked, zealotry and planetary destruction weren't exactly in the welcoming committee handbook." "Your resistance is futile," Orexia snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Surrender now and perhaps I will show mercy." Bara snorted, crossing her arms. "Mercy from a zealot, that's rich." "Thanks for the offer," Ryland said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But I think we'll take our chances with the whole living thing." The screen flickered again, Orexia's image replaced by static as the signal continued its relentless assault on her systems. Ryland couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction as the zealot ship struggled to maintain formation. "What's the plan now, fearless leader?" Kiera asked, her tone light despite the tension. "We keep the pressure on," Ryland replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. "With their comms scrambled, they are like a headless hydra. We just need to keep cutting at the stumps." The battle continued, a chaotic dance of ships and signals, each side vying for control. The zealot ships, once a cohesive force, now flew in disarray, their pilots fighting not just the crew of the Elysium but their own malfunctioning systems. "Looks like they're having a bad day," Tobin quipped, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Shame we can't send them a sympathy card." "Don't get cocky," Ryland warned, though he couldn't deny the surge of hope that filled him. "We're not out of the woods yet." The Elysium darted through the fray, a nimble predator among wounded prey. The crew worked in concert, their movements a testament to their shared history, their shared struggle. It was a thing of beauty, this dance of survival, and for the first time in a long time, Rylan allowed himself to believe they might just pull it off. "We're making headway," Jenna reported, her voice tinged with excitement. "The signal's holding strong. Their network's on the brink of collapse." "Good," Ryland said, his eyes fixed on the screens. "Now let's see if we can finish this without getting ourselves blown to bits." The battle reached a fever pitch, the zealots fighting with a desperation born of fanaticism. But they were outmatched, their systems crumbling under the relentless assault of the Elysium signal. One by one their ships fell, drifting in space like so much flotsam. "Looks like we've got him on the ropes," Bara said, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "Now's our chance to end this." Ryland nodded, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his crew. They were weary, battered by battle and burdened by uncertainty, but there was a fire in their eyes that refused to be extinguished. "Let's end it then," he said, his voice firm. "Let's take back what's ours." The Elysium surged forward, a spear of defiance aimed at the heart of zealotry. Orexia's ship loomed ahead, a fortress of twisted metal and fanatical zeal. But the crew was undaunted, their resolve as unyielding as the void. They closed the distance, the Elysium's weapons primed and ready. It was a moment suspended in time, a heartbeat stretched to eternity, as the fate of billions hung in the balance. "Fire!" Rylan commanded, his voice echoing through the ship. The Elysium's weapons barked to life, a symphony of destruction that tore through the zealot fleet. Aurexia's ship shuddered under the barrage, its hull buckling, its systems failing. The crew watched as the ship began to break apart, the zealots' reign of terror crumbling before their eyes. It was a moment of victory, hard-won and bittersweet, a testament to humanity's resilience in the face of darkness. "It's over," Kiera whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We did it." "Yeah," Ryland said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "We did." The Elysium drifted through the debris field, a lone sentinel standing guard over a world on the brink of salvation. The crew was silent, their faces etched with the weight of what they had accomplished. "Here's to us," Tobin said, raising an imaginary glass. "The crazy ones." The crew laughed, their voices carrying through the ship, a celebration of life in the face of death, a defiance of fate. It was a moment of triumph, a reminder that even in the darkest times there was hope. "To whatever comes next," Ryland said, his voice filled with determination. The Elysium continued its vigil, a beacon of hope in the vast expanse of space, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Humanity's future was uncertain, but for now, they had taken a step towards reclaiming their destiny. And that was worth fighting for. The Elysium floated through the debris field with all the grace of a drunk swan, battered and bruised but still very much in the game. Ryland Vex stood at the heart of it, arms crossed, eyes on the console that had become both his prison and his savior. He could almost hear the universe laughing at him. And why not? A group of misfits had just taken down the intergalactic equivalent of a religious pyramid scheme. "Well, that's one way to quit smoking," Bara quipped, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife through tension. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a long breath. "Zealots on fire tend to make for decent fireworks." "Yeah, but the cleanup's going to be a bitch," Ryland replied, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion barely masked by his sarcasm. "So much for universal peace and benevolence." Kiera, who'd finally stopped clutching her handheld like it was the last chocolate in the galaxy, chuckled. "I dunno, Captain. Might make a nice addition to the cosmic junkyard collection. Right next to my hopes and dreams," Tobin added, still grinning like this whole fiasco had been nothing more than an elaborate game of space charades. They'd done it. The Zealots were down, their ships reduced to scrap metal and bad memories. Yet the victory felt as hollow as a politician's promise. Ryland scanned the debris field, a mess of shattered hulls and extinguished ambition. "So," Jenna began, tapping a finger on her console, "what happens now? Do we get medals, or is this one of those thanks for saving the universe, now get out situations? More like congratulations, you've survived. Please enjoy your complimentary trauma and existential dread," Ryland retorted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But hey, at least we've got stores for the grandkids. Assuming we make it that far," Bara pointed out, her tone dry as the Martian desert. "Anyone else think the universe is just one big cosmic joke?" "A bad one," Kiera muttered, "with us as the punchline." The Elysium drifted onward, leaving behind the wreckage of misguided faith and shattered dreams. The crew, worn but unbeaten, had become something more than just survivors. They'd become a testament, damn, there it was again, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity had a nasty habit of clawing its way up from the depths and flipping off the universe in the process. "Think Earth will finally catch a break?" Tobin wondered, his optimism as unflagging as ever. "Maybe," Ryland shrugged, lips twitching into a half-smile. "If it doesn't implode from the collective weight of its own stupidity first." "Well, that's comforting," Jenna snorted. "But it might be nice to see Earth without a side of apocalypse. Assuming the cultists don't come back with a bigger stick," Bara noted, ever the realist. "Because they always come back, like cockroaches. Really annoying, heavily armed cockroaches." The cockpit fell silent for a moment, each crew member caught in their own thoughts. They'd faced down zealots, sabotage, and the sheer unpredictability of space, and they'd come out on top. But the universe was a vast place, and they knew better than to let this single victory go to their heads. "Captain," Kiera said, her voice softer now, "where to next?" Rylan leaned back in his chair, eyes on the stars beyond. "Now that's the million-credit question, isn't it? But first, let's get the Elysium patched up. I've seen less damaged ships in scrapyards." "To the mining outpost, then?" Tobin asked, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Nothing like a floating junkyard to put things into perspective," Rylan replied, smirking. "Guess we'll fit right in." The Elysium's engine sputtered to life, protesting the action like an old man with arthritis. They'd been through hell, but they still had a little fight left in them. With the coordinates set, the ship lumbered toward the mining outpost, leaving behind a galaxy that, for now, was a little less chaotic. "We should probably have a plan in case the universe decides to screw us over again," Jenna suggested, ever the pragmatist. "Simple," Ryland said. "We charge extra." The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the cockpit, a defiant chorus of survivors who'd faced the abyss and come out the other side, scarred but unbeaten. The universe might love its cruel jokes, but this time they'd had the last laugh. Arrival at the mining outpost was about as glamorous as landing in a landfill during a meteor shower. The outpost was a hunched hulk of rust and rot, orbiting Jupiter like a derelict moon. But like most things they'd encountered recently, it was all they had. "Welcome home," Barra said, dry as ever. "If home's where the trash is," Kiera added, shaking her head at the state of the place. "Let's try not to make any new enemies," Ryland said, eyeing the outpost's docking bay as they approached. "At least not until we've got fuel and a few less holes in the hull." "Right? Because we're clearly running low on those," Tobin joked, gesturing to the pockmarked walls around them. The Elysium docked with all the grace of a one-legged dancer, but it held barely. As the crew disembarked, they were greeted by the sight of the outpost's denizens, a motley collection of mechanics, traders, and people who'd lost bets with fate. "Smells like opportunity," Ryland muttered, taking in the sights and sounds. "Opportunity must have a lot of cats," Barra retorted, wrinkling her nose. They made their way to the central hub, where deals were made and reputations were lost. The air was thick with the smell of grease and desperation, a fitting backdrop for their little victory lap. "Got anything to trade?" a grizzled mechanic asked, eyeing them like they were a particularly interesting fungus. "Just our charm and wit," Tobin replied, earning a bark of laughter from the mechanic. "Good luck with that," the man said, his good humor fading as he glanced at the Elysium. "She'll need a bit more than a smile to get back in the black." "No kidding," Ryland sighed. "Let's get to work then, and keep an eye out for anything salvageable. You never know when a busted piece of junk might save your life." Jenna, Kiera, and Barra set to work, their movements a well-rehearsed dance of efficiency and purpose. They'd been through worse, and if anyone could get the Elysium back in fighting shape, it was them. As they labored, Ryland took a moment to reflect on all they'd been through. They'd faced down zealots, stared death in the face, and somehow managed to keep their sense of humor intact. If that wasn't a miracle, he didn't know what was. "Captain," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Tobin, grinning as he gestured to a crate of spare parts. "Look what I found." "It's like Christmas came early." "Great," Ryland replied, inspecting the haul. "Now all we need is a fat man in a red suit and our holiday's complete." As they worked, the crew fell into an easy rhythm, each member pulling their weight and then some. The Elysium was more than just a ship. It was their home, their lifeline, and they were determined to see it fly again. "Think we'll ever see Earth again?" Kiera asked, her voice filled with a mix of longing and apprehension. "Depends," Ryland replied, not looking up from his work, "on what you consider worth seeing." "Good point," Kiera said, nodding, "but it'd be nice to have the option." "Options are for people who aren't wanted by the universe," Barra noted, her tone blunt but truthful. "Well, here's to making the best of bad options," Ryland said, raising an imaginary glass in a mock toast. As the Iors dragged on, they patched the Elysium as best they could. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get them moving again. More importantly, it was a testament to their tenacity, their refusal to give in. "Looks like we're good to go," Jenna announced, brushing dirt off her hands. "At least for now." "Great," Ryland said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get the hell out of here before the universe realizes we've had a brief moment of respite." The crew boarded the Elysium once more, each member taking up their positions with the weariness of a battle well fought but the anticipation of what lay ahead. They'd survived, they'd won, and now they were ready for whatever fresh hell the universe had in store. "Where to, Captain?" Tobin asked, buckling into his seat. "Anywhere but here," Ryland said, grinning as he punched in the coordinates. "Let's see what new trouble we can find." The Elysium's engines roared to life, propelling them forward into the vastness of space. They were a ragtag bunch, barely held together by duct tape and dreams, but they were ready for whatever came next. "Here's to us," Ryland murmured, echoing Tobin's earlier toast. "To the crazy ones," Kiera added, a smile playing on her lips. The ship surged forward, leaving the mining outpost behind as they set course for parts unknown. They were battered, bruised, sarcastic to a fault, but they were survivors. And as long as they had each other, as long as they had the Elysium, they had hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. With stars stretching out before them and the past trailing in their wake, the crew of the Elysium embarked on their next adventure, ready to face whatever the universe had to throw at them with a crooked grin and a middle finger raised high. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be human.